Hi, good morning, everyone. So we're going to talk about data privacy today. Right? So that's what was spoken about in the last week, and we'll first hash. I mean, just have a small hashing of what happened in the previous week videos, and then we'll just go over some questions. So I think this week's topics are a bit theoretical in the sense it goes into the philosophy of how the origins of data privacy and so um, and last week we saw the technologies used for cybersecurity, and that had some technical workings behind it. So now let's quickly switch over and get started. Yeah, so I think the lecture started with talk about confidentiality, integrity, and we've seen what some of these are in the previous classes. So one of the uses of cryptographic operations, right? That is hashing. So what a hash does, I won't talk in detail about blockchain because that's not what the concentration here is. Uh, what what is meant by hashing, right? So hash functions are mathematical algorithms that generate message digest or summary to confirm message identity and confirm no content has changed. So what happens in hashing is, so we have a function, and to this function I'm giving an input. This function gives out a hash value, right? So this input can be anything. This input can be a file, it can be a string, it can be a paragraph, a sentence, just digital data. That's what the input is going to be for this. But what will it give out? It will always give out a fixed length hash. So this hash, right? So this hash might sound very scary, but it's not. It's just another set of alphabets, alphanumeric alphabets like Z, Y, A, 947, B, 8756. So what this means is no matter how big of a file, this can be no matter how big, correct? No matter how big this file is or how big this paragraph is, if it goes through this function, and this function is called the hash function, it does some operations in between and gives out a constant fixed length string, right? So because it is able to do this, we use this hash, and this hash is a unique value. I mean, it's theoretically, I mean, for perception it's unique, but theoretically there can be collisions. But the point here is you give a file and then you get a particular hash value. So this is file and then you get a hash value. But if you change something in this file, right? If you change some, if you open this picture, let's say the file is a picture, then you open this file in Paint and then you draw. Just put one small dot of, let's say, color, or you put a very small line and then you save the picture again, and then you run the function through the hash function. So this hash will not be the same. These two things will not be the same because the output depends on the input. If the input differs even by a single bit, then the output will drastically differ. So what is this being used for? This is being used for to check the integrity of the files. Meaning, if I, as someone who has written a program and I want people to download it and use it, what I'll do is I'll give my program in my website, and I'll also give its hash, right? The hash of this program. So why this is important? Because when somebody downloads the program, they can recalculate the hash in their computer and then see if both the hashes match. If they match, then the program that they downloaded is the program that I put out, and there are no errors in it. No bits have been flipped. So the exe file is perfectly fine. But if the hash value changes, then something is wrong with the program. So this also prevents people from modifying the program and selling it off as mine. It, and selling it off as mine, but they might have done something malicious to the program. So essentially, these hash functions, they help handle integrity. So any questions on the hash functions? If you have, please let me know. So essentially now the point is integrity is handled by hashing. While previously we saw that confidentiality is handled through encryption. So one of the major uses of this hashing function is blockchains, which uses a link of blocks, and each block cannot be modified without its hash changing, and that's the inherent property of a hash. Right. So now there were some encryption standards, but let's just skip through this. This is and we already spoke about the major one, which is RSA, and apparently the developers of RSA offered a $10,000 reward for the first person to crack the algorithm. Interesting. Okay. So this just gives you an idea of how long it will take for us to brute force the keys, or rather, I mean, just check all possible keys and then see if it makes sense, right? So that's going to take so much time. The more you increase, the more bits you increase for the encryption, the more time it takes, right? So that's pretty much why, and that's why they say this our conventional encryption will fail under quantum computing. Because quantum computers can, it seems they can, they have the processing capabilities are quite rich, and they can stay in multiple states at the same time. I don't know exactly how that happens, but yeah, quantum computers, if they are commercially viable, then we are in for a complete change in the world. We need to come up with new algorithms, because even though these algorithms are good, they are good because current computers do not have the ability to crack it in a short span of time. But quantum computers, they can do it because their processing capability is infinitely higher. So these security modules and everything we can just skip over and everything. think we spoke about, I think the professor spoke about encryption and a particular use case, or rather a particular case study which happened all across India, where people's WhatsApp chats are put up. Then how were these WhatsApp chats obtained? So the answer to the how was um, that the chat backups that WhatsApp stores, they are not encrypted, so they were looked at and they could get messages, right? But the question was it okay to put out the chats? So it was not. In an ideal world, it should not have been put out, but yeah, there are many other reasons to that. And yeah, it was this particular case, and the backup was the reason why they could look up at the chats. Right? So I think this was all discussed in the class, and yeah, let's just talk a little bit about this word that fears new. So what is panopticon? Right? So this is the word that describes the phenomenon of being observed while the subject does not know. So the subject does not know, meaning I'm the subject, I don't know I'm being observed, but I am being observed. So I think these are all philosophical beginnings of privacy. Privacy, is it a created issue? So this was an interesting take on privacy, because I still remember. Uh, I mean, I don't remember, but we all have had these postcards come up, right? People write something on it like this, and then they just send it. So, as the professor was saying, everybody can read what's there on the postcard. No one worried about it. So now, as society becomes more sophisticated, privacy, I think, is as society becomes more individualistic rather than collective. Right? Previously, it was collective. Indian society was very collective, but now it's more individualistic. So privacy is becoming more and more important for everybody. Um, and then, yeah, so reductionism versus coherentism. We'll talk about this when we look at the appropriate question for this. So this is an interesting view. So they said that privacy is not important as long as there is no economic consequence. Yeah, in a way, is if privacy is going to cause economic loss, is when people wake up to it. Until then, it's just there. It's like somebody else's data is leaking. I don't care about it. Then yeah, so let's look at this fair information practice principles. So um, the U.S. Secretary's Advisory Committee, they came up with it in 1973 itself, so nearly 30-40 years before us, on privacy. So our IT acts, they came up, I think, in 2000s, right? So what does this say? There must be no personal data record keeping systems whose very existence is secret. Meaning, if you're collecting data, you should not keep it secret. You should let people know that you're collecting their personal data. This is point one. This is transparency. There must be a way for a person to find out what information about the person is in a record and how it is used. Right? So if you're collecting something, then that person should be able to query what part of his information is there in the record, basically. So it's like, what are you collecting about me? Are you collecting my age, my email address, or whatever, right? So this is the second thing. And the third is, there must be a way for a person to prevent information about the person that must be for a person to prevent information about the person that was obtained for one purpose from being used or made available for other purposes without the person's consent. So apparently, I think, and uh, this is good, but I think once the data is collected, right? So if you're collecting the data for phone numbers for one reason, let's say your tax organization is collecting phone numbers so that they can call you in case you need to do your tax returns, or in case there is something wrong with your taxes and you need to pay more, right? But phone numbers are collected for this purpose. But imagine if this phone number is given to an ad agency, and these ad agencies keep calling you again and again and again. So that's a nuisance, right? So which means if you're collecting data for a particular reason, you should not be used for some other reason, which is basically telemarketing. So these were all thought about in 1973 itself. It's pretty advanced, pretty high. So there must be a way for a person to correct or amend a record, identify information about the person. So if wrong information is collected, then there must be a way for us to correct the record. So any organization creating, maintaining, using, or disseminating records of identified personal data must assure the reliability of the data to their for their intended use, and must take precautions to prevent misuses of the data. Right. So essentially, if you're handling personal data, um, so they must take precautions to prevent the misuse of data. So this is kind of connected to this, but also, and of course, the data must be reliable, which means it must also be accurate data, or recent data. Right? So these were like the 5 principles that talked about data privacy in 1973, and there are some stakeholders here. So the data subject is the individual whose data has been processed or used, which is basically you, me, and everybody else. Um, so they say, here's my personal data. Do with it what you need for the services you're going giving me, or for related reasons you've described in your privacy policy. So there's a privacy policy, which basically when you go to a website or any other thing and you sign up, you say, I've read it and I agreed. I don't think anybody reads through that policy. If you do, that kudos, great. Actually, you're supposed to read through it. But essentially, we say, okay, you can use our data for your purposes or any other purposes that you've outlined in your privacy policy. So from the privacy policy, somebody has basically said that I'm going to give your data to telemarketers, then that means you're gone. In the sense, you've basically given consent to them. So that's the privacy policy, and the privacy policy that determines how your data is going to be used. Right? So the controller. So once the data is taken from the subject, it is given to the controller. So the controller determines the purposes and means of processing personal data. So the controller is the one who may not directly process the data, but he defines the privacy policy, and he instructs people who are going to use the data to use it in a particular way and not do whatever they want with it. So now the controller will give the data to the processor. Sometimes the processor and the controller would be the same organization because they are the ones handling the data. But in many cases, data is basically outsourced to other companies to gain inferences out of it. So for example, there is Walmart. Walmart is a big chain of companies, and they get a lot of data with what their customers buy, at what point do they buy it. Do they buy from the first rack, second rack, third rack, all these inferences, and then they want to optimize their stores in such a way they want to maximize sales. They have this data, and do you know who they give this to? They give this data to an external organization, and in this case, this organization's name was Mu Sigma. So Mu Sigma is located, I think, in Bangalore. One part of it is in Bangalore, and the people there, they work with the data from Walmart. Um, so in this case, the controller becomes Walmart, and the processor becomes Mu Sigma. Okay. So they say, here's our customer's data. Only do with it exactly what we tell you. Only process it in the way we tell you, and don't use it for anything else. Okay. So the processes It's the processor processes personal data on behalf of the controller and doesn't decide purpose or means. So there's a data processor. So this is how uh, data is consumed in the current world. And the controller is also called as data fiduciary. Sorry. So this is CFIP. Sometimes keep um, the acronyms in your mind, because in the questions it might just come out as acronyms. So it's concerned for information privacy, CFIP. So CFIP has 4 areas, and the first is collection. So the second is unauthorized access. Third is errors, and the fourth is secondary use. Okay, this is there in the slide. You can, I think this is basically straightforward to understand that the first part talks about collection of data, and the second part talks about unauthorized access, made to make sure that the data that's collected is not authorized by unauthorized, it's not accessed by unauthorized parties. And then errors in the data. Data needs to be accurate, because if I'm collecting it for some reason, then should not have any errors in it. There was an example given also with gate and um, yeah, with the gate, and someone gave uh, a birth rate wrong, and then he was not able to log in, and so. So again, secondary use. It should not use it for any other purposes. So you see this CFIP. This was 1996, and this was 1973. So in 20 years, things have changed, and so they also changed the and added a lot of new aspects to it, new uh, things that reflect the change in technology. Because if you just take this, if you take these points, you may not be able to map to every scenario that happens in the digital world. So you come up with new ways of getting it. And of course, we have eras of privacy, then comes social media, cloud computing, big data. So this all changes the paradigm. Right? So why organizations should worry? So since Jan 2005, you can read this by yourself, but I'll just say it out to emphasize on the difficulty of losing data. So 857 million records were exposed, 4,586 data breaches. So lawsuits against popular websites like Facebook, and you have so many leaks and a lot of monetary compensation for it. So why should individuals worry, right? So if you see this scenario, someone went to a shop and then they fell down in that shop. Okay? So in the US or outside India, people tend to sue people a lot, in the sense that everything goes, if there's a dispute, it goes to the court. So what happened here was he fell and he slipped and he fell. So he sued the supermarket, saying, you had not given me warning that this place is wet, or I what in the sense that I could not I didn't know, because you're supposed to let people know the floor is wet, otherwise they'll slip and fall down. So what happened was the supermarket had data about every individual and what they bought. So when they looked into this particular person's records, they found out that he bought a lot of alcohol. So now they will use that information against him in court, saying that he's an alcoholic and that's why he fell. How can you trust how can you trust what an alcoholic says? He might have been under alcohol that day when he fell. Right? So this is where privacy is breached, and Yeah, that's pretty much what it is. And this is a very small overview of what happened this week. And now we can just go towards the questions. So confidentiality is concerned with the externalization of restricted but accurate information to a specific entity. So I think this is just a lot of fancy English, right? So what does this mean? I'll just give you a small translation of what this means so that we can understand. So what the sentence means is, give me one moment, I'll be back. Yeah, sorry about that. I'll just continue. Yeah. So, Kanakalata, yeah, you're right. You're right. Yeah, the answer is true. But when you read such kind of uh, heavy words, right, like concerned with externalization of restricted but accurate information to a specific entity, so this might not be very natural to most people. So basically, um, what this translates to is confidentiality is concerned with the protection and sharing of accurate restricted restricted information only with specific entities. So basically, this ensures that the information which is sensitive is only disclosed to the authorized parties here. So essentially, confidentiality is concerned with the externalization of restricted. So here, the word externalization means it's with the context of there is data which is supposed to be external, it's supposed to be internal, but you have to externalize it because if you want to process the data, you need to give it to an entity which has the ability to process that data. Because if you don't have the ability, then you cannot do anything with it, right? So essentially, as an organization, I need to externalize the data, and this externalization can happen with another specific entity, but the aspects that deal with how the data is being used or whether is it being kept confidential or is this entity giving it away to somebody, we don't know. And what deals with this whole idea of data going away, that the whole thing is actually privacy. Yes, privacy is also an answer to this, but here they've written confidentiality because the data should also be kept confidential. So that's pretty much why the answer to this is true. Okay. So questions. So we saw a slide about reductionism and coherentism, right? So let me just give you the definitions of what this coherentism is. The answer for this is directly from the slides, by the way, but still, I think not much was spoken about it, so I'll just speak about it. So coherentism basically is a line of thought which it basically implies that for a concept to be justified, it must be coherent with one with, a, with its contemporary set of beliefs. So, or in other words, coherentism looks at certain aspects as individual units itself. Um, so, in contrast, there is something called reductionism. So, what reductionism does is, so reductionism takes a belief, a concept, let's say, it takes a concept and which can be reduced to further smaller set of beliefs. Okay. So these are all very philosophical. So essentially, coherentism treats beliefs as beliefs or concepts as concepts. It cannot be broken down further. But reductionism, it says if you have a concept, it can be broken down further. It can be broken down into further smaller uh, or even other bigger encompassing terms like liberty or freedom. Okay, so now in this context, how does this line of thought, which is coherentism, how does that treat privacy? So coherentism essentially means that whatever concept we're talking about is standalone, meaning it cannot be reduced further. So that's the whole point of coherentism here. So what they say here, what is permission here? Is permission an answer to this? So uh, again, the correct answer to this is it treats privacy as a distinct right. Okay? It is a distinct right in the sense it's a separate or it's a unique right, meaning it cannot be broken down further. Now, why can it not be permission, order, or freedom? Okay, so privacy, can privacy be a permission? No, it cannot. So privacy is not merely a permission that is granted to someone, but it is a distinct right that an individual holds. Correct. It's not like, no, okay, you have permission to privacy right now, so you have you can practice privacy or something like that. That doesn't happen. So coherentism does not look at privacy that way. So is privacy an order under coherentism? Um, no, it's privacy is pretty much not about establishing order, but it is about protecting someone's personal space and their rights. Right. So privacy is not about order as well. So is privacy a freedom? Here, yes, privacy may involve freedom, but when you look at coherentism as it is, it specifically treats privacy as a distinct right, which is separate from other freedoms. So you have other freedoms, right? Like you may have liberty, you may have say liberty and other fundamental things. Okay, so there is liberty, and then there is freedom. Right? So privacy cannot be broken down into these two things. In a way, yes, privacy's privacy also has freedom in it, liberty also to some extent. But because this is coherentism, you're not going to break it down. So it basically treats privacy as a distinct right. You just need to know this. So, right? Let's move on now. This was a tough question actually. So probably very difficult to answer uh, in the context of an exam, but yeah, this is what it is. Okay. So being observed while the subject does not know is called. So being observed while the subject does not know is called um, panopticon. Is it transparency? Is it prevention? Is it anonymity? Again, tricky questions, maybe. So we have to do a process of elimination for all of this. So if you look at transparency, it refers to openness, but not secret observation. So transparency refers to openness, but it doesn't say anything about being observed while the subject does not know. So this is basically covert observation. So what this is covert observation, right? So transparency is not the answer. So when we look at prevention, right? So this means stopping something from happening. From happening, right? So that is prevention. And anonymity. So anonymity, it means um, something being unknown or unidentifiable. Um, means being unknown or unidentifiable. Right. So the only thing left out is A, and of course, the definition of panopticon is basically this. We saw this in the slides, but one can always make a case that this could also mean B. So you can always say if I'm looking at someone, then that means there should be transparency that I'm looking at someone. So, but in this case, panopticon is a more apt term. Right? The definition of panopticon definitely is the definition of panopticon. So as you can make a case for transparency as well, but we need to go with that answer which fits the context more. And in this case, it's panopticon, right, and not transparency. Sadly, but yeah, transparency. You can also make a case for transparency to be the answer. CFIP. We just saw this, right? It has four constructs. Which of these is not in it? Is it collection? Is it unauthorized access? Is it C, autonomy, or is it D, errors? Right. So we just saw this. So correction was a part of it, unauthorized access was a part of it, errors was a part of it. Only thing that was not a part of it was autonomy. Sorry, this is autonomy. And what is the meaning of autonomy? So autonomy means you have the ability to do what you want to do. It has nothing to do with um, um, CFIP. And what is the fourth uh, concept, fourth construct it talks about CFIP? It talks about secondary use. Again, this is directly from the slides. And autonomy is not a part of it. Okay, now this is a question that you should all be able to answer because we just spoke about it. This is number 5. According to Dash, privacy is not a distinct value concept. Because it could be conceptually reduced to other values like liberty. Yeah. So what is the answer to this? Is it A, coherentism? Is it B, reductionism? Or is it C, privacy? Or is it D, security? So we saw what coherentism was, right? Coherentism treats privacy as a separate entity altogether. But here, what are they saying? Here they're saying, according to one of these concepts, privacy is not a distinct value concept because it could be reduced to other values like liberty. So when you say reduce, the answer is reductionism. It's as simple as that. And the answer cannot be privacy because according to privacy is not no. This is not the answer. And according to security, privacy is not is also not the answer. So it's either A or B, and the answer is why is it not A? Because coherentism treats privacy as a separate individual entity. This is another question. We just looked at it. Right? Dash determines the purposes and means of processing personal data. Is it a data fiduciary? Is it B, data processor? Is it C, data principal? Or is it B, data users? Right? So we saw in the chain of the data processing chain of events, right? The key stakeholders. Um, who determines the purpose and the means of processing data? It's not the data processor, so they do the work, they process data. And data principal doesn't make any sense. And data users, these are all the end consumers of it. So data fiduciary is the answer. Fiduciary is basically the person who controls the data, the one in the middle. Data user, no, the answer is not data user. And why is it not data user? Because data users, they might handle the data. I can see where the confusion comes from, but they do not determine its purposes and means. Meaning they don't determine what the data should be used for or how it should be used. So who does that? That is done by the fiduciary. So we saw this stakeholder diagram, right? I think it's in the slides, so you can go back and take a look at it. So consider data fiduciary for this. Just to understand this question a little bit better, let's look at a case study. Right. So this is number 7. So just read through this scenario. So an IPL team management contracts a market research specialist team to carry out players' satisfaction survey. So the IPL team specifies the budget and the deadline, but the market research team determines sample sizes and interview methods. The market research team decides which player to select for the interview and what information will be collected and how the information will be collected and how the information will be presented to the IPL team management, who is the data controller in the situation. So who is the data controller, right? So there is IPL team management, and there is a market research team. So they're asking who is the data fiduciary. Right? We saw fiduciary here. So who is the fiduciary here in this scenario? And then there is the IPL team itself. Right? I'll just wait for a few minutes and then okay. So this is B. Okay, you're saying okay, both A and B are controllers. Okay, yeah, you're right actually. Pretty much right. Okay, and basically both the IPL team management and the market research team, they both contribute to determining how the data is supposed to be used and the means and purposes of how the data is supposed to be used. So I think looks like the answer is pretty straightforward. I'm surprised. Okay, good, nice. So fair information practice. Where did we see this? We saw it right here. Right? The slides, we saw it. Fair information practice, FIP. Right. So if you look at all of these points, they're basically asking which of these four is not covered in it. So is secret record keeping systems, is it covered in it in FIP? The answer is yes, it is covered. This issue is basically addressed, right? So FIP does address concerns over hidden or undisclosed record information. So yes, this is covered. So does it cover access by data subjects to the stored information? Meaning if somebody has taken my data, I should be able to access the data and see what they've collected, right? So FIP also ensures that individuals can access their stored personal data, covered. And the ability by a data subject to correct errors. Yes, there was a specific point about this, about correcting errors in my own data. So yes, this is also covered. So, but it does not talk about data localization, right? Um, so what is data localization? So it basically involves where the data is stored physically. And so this is something that it does not cover, because at that point when FIP came out, it was 1973. All computerization was not at its maximum. So, but still, yeah, the point of server farms were not there. So still, data localization was not something they looked at. They looked at it after 20 years, that point of time. And then finally, the last question is about GDPR. So the answer to this question is C. So if anybody does not comply GDPR regulations, then the fine for it is 20 million euros or 4% of that particular company's global turnover. So what is GDPR? Right. So I think it was not discussed in this class, I believe. So we'll just take a look at what GDPR is. So GDPR is basically a comprehensive, it's a data privacy law which was enacted by the European Union. So the European Union basically consists of multiple European countries like Germany, France, Netherlands, Belgium. This is basically Europe, and there are multiple countries which come under the European Union. So this European Union regulated a law for all the countries under it that regulates how companies or organizations handle personal data of individuals within the European Union. So basically, it was designed to give individuals more control over their personal data, and it also wanted to simplify the regulations for businesses. Meaning, it's like it told the businesses, if you're going to use data of our citizens, you need to follow certain set of rules. You cannot follow it, either don't come inside or you pay a fine. So what is that fine? That fine is basically 20 million euros, or which 4 percentage of uh, global turnover. Yeah.
Excuse me, sir. Who has to pay
Yeah,
this one?
the
If someone
organization.
is
The organization. So,
organization.
for example, if Google does not follow whatever they are saying, then they have to pay 20 million or 4 percentage of the company's global turnover. The answer is whichever is higher. By the way, I forgot to say this. Whichever is higher. So, which means definitely for organizations like Google, 4 percentage of their global turnover is definitely higher. Must be the billions. So, yeah, that's how seriously they take data privacy in Europe. So, if you look at what GDPR does, it basically defines what personal data is. So personal data is any information that can identify a person directly or indirectly. Correct? It can be something like email addresses, IP addresses, location data, etc. So, what the funny thing here, or rather, I mean, the logical thing you could say is GDPR applies not only to companies that are inside the European Union. No, it's not like the company has to be headquartered inside the country in the European Union. It also applies to countries, or sorry, companies outside the European Union, which use the data that originated from the European Union. Basically, if I'm processing any of the data, then I am liable to be prosecuted under GDPR. But the question remains how they're going to catch someone from another country. But again, that's pretty much the law. So, in a nutshell, there are some principles. The first principle is data must be processed in legal, fair, and transparent manner. And the second is data must be collected for a specific purpose and not used for anything beyond that. So the third is only the data necessary should be collected and processed. Fourth is data must be kept accurate and up to date. The fifth is data should not be stored longer than necessary. And the sixth is data must be processed securely to protect against unauthorized or unlawful processing, loss, or damage. And there are two types of fines for serious infringements, right? GDPR imposes heavy fines for non-compliance. So the for very serious infringements, very serious problems or non-compliance, it is 20 million and 4 percentage of global turnover. But for less severe violations, it's 10 million or 2 percentage of global turnover. Okay, so the question here is maximum fine. So the maximum fine is this. And what is, there are some other fines also. This is also another fine that's possible under GDPR, but this is the maximum fine. Yeah, I think that concludes today's session, and we can probably exit. Today was a bit of a theoretical underpinning data privacy. And yeah, if you have any questions, you can ask. Otherwise, we can push off. I'll be here for like the next 2 or 3 minutes, and then if not, then I can end the meeting. Okay, we can end this meeting at this point of time. Okay.